Charles Ponzi. In 1920, an Italian immigrant in Boston convinced thousands of people that he could double their money in 90 days by exploiting price differences in international postal reply coupons. He paid early investors using money from newer ones, and word spread fast. At his peak, he was taking in over $1 million a week. People fell for it because the early investors were genuinely paid, and those people told their friends and neighbors. The returns seemed unusual but not impossible, and Ponzi carried himself with total confidence, dressing well and speaking as though he had discovered something others simply had not noticed yet. When investigators finally looked closely at the numbers, they found he had almost no actual investments at all. He collapsed within months, but not before wiping out the savings of roughly 40,000 people. His name became the word we now use for every scheme like it: Bernie Madoff. For nearly 5 decades, Bernie Madoff ran what is widely considered the largest Ponzi scheme in history. He was a respected figure on Wall Street, a former chairman of the Nasdaq exchange, and the kind of person wealthy families and charities trusted without question. People fell for it largely because of who he was. He did not advertise or chase clients. He made his fund seem exclusive, sometimes turning people away, which only made investors more eager to get in. The returns he promised were not outrageous, just steady and consistent year after year, which actually made the fraud harder to question. His reputation did most of the work. The scheme unraveled during the 2008 financial crisis when too many people needed their money at once. The total losses came to around $65 billion. Madoff died in prison in 2021. Allen Stanford. Running his operation out of a bank in Antigua, Allen Stanford sold certificates of deposit promising returns, far above what any legitimate bank could offer. He cultivated an image of wealth and respectability, sponsoring cricket tournaments and hosting lavish events. People trusted him because he operated through an actual licensed bank, which gave the whole thing an air of official legitimacy. The CDs he sold were a familiar product, something people understood, and the returns were high, but not so extreme that they seemed impossible. Investors from across Latin America, the Caribbean, and the United States handed over their savings. Behind the scenes, he was using their money to fund a personal lifestyle that included private jets, yachts, and real estate. When regulators caught up with him in 2009, the losses totaled around $7 billion. He was sentenced to 110 years in federal prison. Scott Rothstein. A high-profile attorney in Florida, Scott Rothstein told investors they could buy structured settlements from legal cases at a discount and collect the full value later. People believed him because he was a real lawyer, running a real and genuinely large law firm. And the concept he described, buying legal settlements, is something that actually exists in legitimate finance. He surrounded himself with the appearance of success and political connection, which made him seem like someone who had earned access to opportunities ordinary people could not find on their own. The settlements he was selling did not exist. He invented the cases, fabricated the documents, and used the money coming in to pay earlier investors. His firm had grown to one of the largest in Florida before the whole thing came apart in 2009. Losses reached around $1.2 billion. Rothstein cooperated with prosecutors and received a 50-year sentence. Tom Petters. Tom Petters told investors he was buying consumer electronics, like televisions, at a discount and reselling them to major retailers, including Costco and Sam's Club. People fell for it because the business model was easy to understand, and the retailers he named were household names that everyone recognized and trusted. He fabricated purchase orders, invoices, and shipping documents, and the paperwork looked convincing enough that even experienced investors did not push back. The returns were consistent, which in fraud tends to build trust faster than spectacular returns would. When the scheme collapsed in 2008, losses were estimated at around $3.7 billion. Petters was convicted on multiple counts of fraud and received a 50-year prison sentence. ZeekRewards. ZeekRewards presented itself as a penny auction website that allowed members to earn daily profit shares by recruiting others and purchasing bids. People were drawn in because it looked like a real business with a real product, and the daily profit share felt like participating in something concrete rather than handing money to a stranger. The returns came in small, regular amounts, which felt more believable than promises of sudden wealth. Many participants also genuinely believed they were building a business by recruiting others, so the motivation to keep going and bring in more people was built into the structure itself. The SEC shut it down in 2012, with losses estimated at around $850 million. The founder, Paul Burks, paid a civil penalty and later faced criminal charges. Lou Pearlman. Lou Pearlman is best known as the man who created the Backstreet Boys and NSYNC, but alongside his music career, he ran a decades-long financial fraud. People trusted him because he was genuinely famous and visibly successful in a way that anyone could see. If someone had helped launch some of the biggest pop acts in the world, it was easy to assume they understood business and knew how to make money grow. He told investors they were buying shares in 2 companies, and nothing about the pitch seemed outlandish, coming from a man who appeared to have already made millions. The scheme ran for over 2 decades before collapsing in 2006 with losses of around $300 million. Pearlman died in a federal prison in 2016. Sergei Mavrodi and MMM. In the early 1990s, as the Soviet Union was falling apart and millions of Russians had little experience with financial markets, a man named Sergei Mavrodi launched a company called MMM. People fell for it, partly because they had no frame of reference for what a legitimate investment looked like, and partly because the advertising was relentless and everywhere. When neighbors and co-workers started reporting real gains, the social pressure to join became enormous. Sitting out felt like missing something real. At its peak, somewhere between 5 and 10 million people had invested. When it collapsed in 1994, the damage to ordinary families was severe. Mavrodi later relaunched versions of the scheme in multiple countries including India, China, South Africa, and Nigeria, finding new audiences who had not lived through the original collapse. Reed Slatkin. Reed Slatkin was a co-founder of Earthlink, one of the early internet service providers, which gave him a level of credibility that money alone cannot buy. People trusted him because he had already made something real. Being invited into his investment club felt like being allowed into a circle that the average person did not have access to, and that exclusivity made people less likely to ask hard questions. For nearly 2 decades, he ran the fund without serious scrutiny, fabricating statements and using new deposits to cover withdrawals. His victims included celebrities, business executives, and close personal friends. The scheme collapsed in 2001 with losses of around $593 million. Slatkin pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 14 years in prison. Nevin Shapiro. Nevin Shapiro ran a grocery diversion business in Florida and used his apparent success to raise money from investors who believed they were financing legitimate wholesale grocery deals. People trusted him because he lived extravagantly and seemed to have the connections to back it up, most visibly through his deep involvement with University of Miami athletics. That kind of public profile made him seem like someone who had already proved himself in the real world. The grocery deals he described were plausible enough, and the returns were consistent, which is often enough to keep investors from looking too closely. The fraud itself amounted to roughly $930 million in losses. Shapiro was sentenced to 20 years in prison in 2011, and the NCAA investigation that followed became one of the most drawn out in college sports history.